it isn't that controversial to say that the first half of 2021 for new music kinda sucked. I mean, yes, we did get some great releases, but compared to the amount of mediocre to flat out awful releases, the first half of the 2021 release season has had some of the poorest output I've seen since the Bro era. But thankfully, the fall and winter seasons of this year look like it'll be a major turnaround, and we've started this new season of albums really good with Lauren Alaina's third studio album, Sitting Pretty on Top of the World. Now, I know we all filter out Lauren Alaina out of our brain involuntarily and write her off as nothing but a feature artist for much more successful songs. I mean, her two most popular songs aren't even hers, but legit, this is one of the best mainstream releases we've had in months. For a year where they can't really decide the sonic direction of the genre moving forward, Lauren Alaina truly represents the middle ground of mass-appealing singles to some really powerful stuff one would only find in a more neo-traditional setting. As someone who wasn't that impressed by her sophomore album, Road Less Traveled, this album pretty much writes out all of the critical misses of that record and improves upon every issue I had with it. The vocals are rationally balanced, the songwriting is really sharp, and the production is a lot clearer and more precise than anything she's really ever done. I'm just guessing after doing all these successful collaborations, she's finally had enough bank to make a competently produced record. And this is in no way disrespect to the late Busby, but there is something about Paul DiGiovanni's production style that I find vastly superior. He's mostly known for being the producer of Jordan Davis, and you get that influence a lot on this record, as Jordan's records, while not that good overall, do have strong production backing them. And while these records are a bit of a mess, the sense of cohesion here frankly blows out any project Jordan Davis has ever done out of the water. Meanwhile, Alaina herself channels in a lot of influence in how she sings and delivers this record. The opening track, It Was Me, feels like her channeling in her inner Miranda Lambert, while also balancing her belting vocals one would associate with Carrie Underwood. I've been waiting for an artist to do that for a very long time, so I'm glad that finally occurred. And with that aside, It Was Me is a very beautiful track in coming to terms with one's own toxicity in a relationship. In some ways, it feels inspired by Back to December and its story. While not the most interesting in its instrumentals, it does have a nice retro feel to it, which we are seeing from a fair amount of artists these days. The following track, If the World Was a Small Town, is when it begins to lean more on the pop sound, and it's a bit generic, but for the most part, it's a bop. I wouldn't necessarily call this track country, but more so southern pop. I find it weird Getting Good is on this record, even though it was on her last project, Getting Over Him. It's a weird thing a lot of artists are doing these days, but this song is pretty much the same except for the fact it features female country star Trisha Yearwood. I'm a bit indifferent on her being here. She doesn't add much of anything else. She doesn't ruin the track like Shania Twain being featured on Hole in the Bottle, but she's really just there. Regardless, Getting Good is a really good song and to me represents the central message or theme of this album of being content with the simple life, where we often progress through life with a goal in mind and despite reaching it we question if we are really happy. And rather it being the biggest moments of our life that make us happy, it's more so the simpler moments we take for granted. The other storyline in this record would be the breakup narrative, and while it's pretty dried out, Lauren Alaina actually does a pretty decent job in tying everything together as well as correlating it with the grander theme of happiness and simplicity, bringing it down to a much more realistic world with lines like cheap tents from Walmart in the song What Do You Think Of? And speaking of that song, wow is the vocal performance really powerful. She teams up with pop star Lucas Graham and wow do they make a great duet. This honestly is one of the best modern pop star collaborations I've seen in a long time. And it gets the one thing countless other collaborations haven't done right, by actually using the artist rather than having them on for sheer cash grab purposes. The vocal climax with them doing the callback is just fantastic for an all around really great song. If I had to name a favorite track on here, it would probably be Good Old Boy, which at least to me calls out the more toxic end of the bro country spectrum, where all these guys would just show off how country they were, their admirations for their trucks, how they brag about fishing and drinking beer. Meanwhile, the woman in this relationship is just forgotten about, held on a pedestal and just to be seen and never heard. I really appreciate this song for calling out the saturation of bragging about the southern lifestyle, and it's not like she's delivering a Twitter post. This is actually a really powerful, well-written song. If you held me like your beer, I'd still be drunk on you. If you loved me like you love to fish, you could have hooked me too. It may be corny to some, but honestly, it's one of the better country criticism songs I've seen in a while. Even better than the famous Girl in a Country song by Maddie and Tay. And that's not to say there aren't any duds on this record, as there are a few. If the World Was a Small Town, the John Party feature, and When the Party's Over are definitely the weakest links for a variety of reasons, from vocals to production and even songwriting, which for the most part of the record is relatively strong. And even then, they aren't bad tracks, rather they just got the short end of the stick. Sonically, this record truly represents the conflict of the industry. Many artists still have the desire to emulate much better artists and songs, while some are trying to hone in what made this genre distinguishable from others. And rather than choose one side, Lauren Alaina truly captures captures the best of both worlds on this record. You have some pop production styles mixed in with some solid country instrumentals and musicianship. Sometimes Lauren comes off in a similar fashion of Kelsea Ballerini, and at other times she's bringing in a bit of southern drawl. The variety here and its tonal consistency is very strong, and I appreciate Lauren trying to be her own sing rather than commit to the two bucket system we are currently seeing in country. I really don't have much else to say. It's a pretty simplistic album, but it thrives in its simplicity. Its nature of telling these slice of life songs is very wholesome, very strong, and it's a record that pretty much knows what it is and doesn't desire to be anything more than that, in a similar fashion to records like Sunshine State of Mind. I just had a really good time with this record, and frankly, think it's much better than all the albums that have gotten the most buzz in the country music community as of lately. In a world where country radio idolizes Gabby Barrett and Maren Morris, it's nice to see women in country that can tell strong stories that happen to be more emotional, thought-provoking, and frankly much more engaging than the radio slop people are fed on the daily. Artists like Lauren Alaina, Tenille Townes, and Kelsea Ballerini represent a strong future for the younger generation of country music. Rating-wise, I'm feeling a decent 7 out of 10 on Sittin' Pretty on Top of the World. Please check this record out. It's everything mainstream country has been missing as of late.